know, there's a clear-cut plot today to destroy scriptural history. And here to talk about that very weighty subject is a good friend of ours, L.A. Marzulli. Welcome to Prophecy Watch.
Great to be here, Gary. Thanks.
And I'm going to hold up L.A.'s book. It's called Nephilim Hybrids. L.A., as you know, has for years been on the trail of the Nephilim. And let's go back and brief the subject for those who may not be familiar with the Nephilim. It's a very biblical subject. It establishes the roots of Old Testament history.
And this is something that I sort of gleaned from one of your talks and the Nephilim Mounds conference that we did several years ago. When we go to the Genesis 3 biblical prophetic narrative, we get this, the scene is simply this. Father God is standing in the garden after the fall. Adam and Eve on one side, the serpent on the other. And he says something which is, I think, in my opinion, sets up really the rest of the prophetic narrative that we see in our Bibles. And it's simply this. The seed of the serpent will be at enmity, at war with the seed of the woman. He, Messiah, the coming Messiah from the seed of the woman, shall crush your head, you'll bruise his heel. That sentence is so pregnant with meaning.
It is.
And what's amazing to me is just 3 chapters later, in Genesis 6, we see the full-on manifestation, in my opinion, of the seed of the serpent. It won't be till thousands of years ago where the seed of the woman finally manifests in Messiah. But the seed of the serpent manifests only 3 chapters later when we read, the sons of God, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, saw the daughters of men, took wives from wherever they wanted to,
yes,
married them, went into them in the biblical sense, and the offspring of this unholy union becomes the Nephilim. And this is something that a lot of Christians have trouble getting their heads around, and I understand that. But yet when we go back, this is what's so important about understanding the exegesis, the interpretation of the Genesis 3 passage, because it sets up the rest of the narrative.
And Roman and Greek history, Israelite history, Hebrew writings.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. The corruption of the human genome resulting in a race of giants. And to make a very long story very short, God was not pleased with these giants. And he instructed his chosen people to get rid of the giants. Now, God would not do such a thing if it were not directly contrary to his plan for humanity.
And this is where a lot of people, in fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the premier evolutionists of the 20th, 21st centuries, goes on the record and uses those scriptures that we hold dear to our hearts, where Joshua and Caleb, about 3,500 years ago, go into the promised land. The mandate from a loving, holy God is to wipe them all out. And that's genocide. There's absolutely no way around it. It's genocidal, homicidal. It's maniacal. But that's not the God who we serve. We serve a loving God. And the moment we plug the Nephilim into that equation, all of a sudden the mandate makes perfect sense. These are hybrid entities, soulless ones in my opinion, in a fixed state, and they are the mortal enemies of God, and they are in a fixed state of rebellion. And that's why that mandate goes out to destroy them.
Now let's go back not too long in the past. L.A. lives on the West Coast, not far from the island Catalina. And he had the opportunity to travel there and to look at some artifacts. Not terribly old. They were artifacts from what, a couple of centuries ago. And you made some observations about them. You published some observations particularly about a couple of skeletons that were larger than they should have been, if all the scientists are right. Tell us about that. Let's revisit that story and bring it up to the present.
Absolutely. Really interesting. A number of years ago, and this is all on the trail of the Nephilim too, which we've talked about, but the bottom line was I was reading a book by Jim Watson called Mysterious Catalina.
Yeah. And
one of the chapters in the books talks about this archaeologist, very primitive archaeologist at the turn of the 20th century, specifically around 1919 and 1921, when Ralph Glidden, the guy's name, is employed by the High Museum to do primitive archaeological digs on the Channel Islands, which go from Santa Barbara down to San Diego. But Watson's book talked about the fact that Ralph Glidden unearthed, according to Glidden, 9-footers. Now that shouldn't be there. And is that hyperbole? Is it just, just trying to sell papers? And the LA Times actually covered the story. So I was very intrigued by this, and I invited Watson to dinner. He lives on the island, and he said, well, I'll be over to the mainland in a few weeks. Well, I met him in Westwood. We had a wonderful dinner together, and he drops a bombshell on me. He goes, L.A., are you aware that they just discovered the lost cache of Ralph Glidden's records in a trunk in the attic of the museum out on Catalina that's been missing for decades. I said, you've got to be kidding me. And it took me 8 months to negotiate a sort of a contract with the museum, but I was allowed to go out and look at the cache of records. Gary, within the first hour, I was hitting pay dirt. And what I mean by that, I was looking at photographs from just about 100 years ago, 1919. And what I was looking at these were anomalous pictures to me.
There's a story here that I want to get to. To me, it's a very sinister plot to cover up clear evidence.
One of the pictures I discovered out there shows Ralph Glidden standing in a recently excavated grave, and in front of him, in situ, which means it's not a disarticulated bone pile. It's the skeleton is placed, uncovered exactly the way it was placed, and articulated skeleton. We know that Ralph Glidden was 5'8". That historically has been documented. John Borragina, the former curator of the museum, went on record, and he had multiple witnesses. Glidden was 5'8". Based on this, I sent the picture out, and this picture, once I basically published the evidence, went viral all over the internet. In fact, I was on the History Channel's In Search of Lost Giants on their finale discussing the research. The three men that took the picture and looked at it, digitized it, put it just under 9 feet, 8 foot 9 inches. We actually rounded it down 6 inches to 8'6", to not be sensationalistic. So we've got basically something out on Catalina that shouldn't be there. So Richard Shaw, my business partner and the director and the co-producer of the Watchers series, we decided to travel back out to Catalina and film there for an episode in Watchers, which turns out it's now in Watchers 10. So we go out to the museum, and we walk into the museum, and the Ralph Glidden exhibit, when I was there, it took up the entire museum. Now it's been reduced to like one room. The first thing that catches our eyes, and we looked at each other in absolute, with our jaws on the ground. When you walk in, the first thing that catches your eye is the picture that I discovered in the archives. Remember, this was sealed away, and there's the picture of Ralph Glidden standing in the recently excavated grave, but the giant, which is in front of him, has been completely redacted from the picture. It is no longer there. And Richard and I, we had the book, On the Trail of the Nephilim 2. Richard goes up and we open up to the picture, the original picture, and hold it underneath the blown up picture. And there it is. And we went to the curator, the assistant curator, and she was just given that picture. She had no idea of what had happened. And why would they do this? And all she could tell us was, well, they didn't want a lot of Native American remains, to offend Native. And I said, every picture here shows Native American remains, except perhaps the one that was redacted. And that was just, to me, it's an academic cover-up because it points back to the veracity of supernatural scriptures that we read about in our Bibles.
Several things occur to me. Number one, who did this, upon whose authority?
Yes.
This, to me, fits the long trail of conspiracy that you know about, that I know about, that goes back 100 years or more, in which giant skeletons routinely disappear, or any evidence of such routinely disappears. Let's go into this a little bit. You've made quite a study of disappearing giants.
The evidence is redacted, it's dealt with, it's removed, it's managed, it's massaged, it's destroyed outright. We ran into one of those destroyed outright artifacts in a place called the Lovelock Cave in Nevada, which was, this is a man by the name of M.K. Davis discovered.
A cave story. I love, everybody dreams of going into a cave and discovering something really interesting. And the Lovelock Cave story is really interesting. Tell us about it.
A man by the name of M.K. Davis first discovered this. And when you get to the Lovelock Cave, you have to understand that it's in a very isolated area. It's barren. In front of it is a dry lake bed. Now, hundreds of years ago, maybe pre-Columbian, it was teeming with water and life and Native American people. But there was also, along with the Native American people, a tribe of cannibalistic, red-haired giants that were taking the women, and they were never seen again, taking the children and eating them. How do I know this? Because I sat down with a Paiute, which is the indigenous tribe in the area, a Paiute elderess, and I asked her about the story. And I took copious notes. It comes on the record. This is what she says. It's true. This is what their oral tradition talks about. red-haired giants who were cannibalistic. And what the Paiutes did is they gave them a warning. You have to stop this behavior. And the giants didn't stop their cannibalistic and their evil ways. So the Paiutes warred against them, and they were killing the giants. And the giants fled to this cave called the Lovelock Cave that at the time was above this very verdant area with lakes and birds and wildlife. No more. It's a dry lake bed. And they holed up in this cave, and the cave originally went far back into the mountain. It's since been completely blown up by the BLM. The entrances are sealed off. You can still go into the cave. So the Paiute, getting back to the story, the Paiutes piled brush in the mouth of the cave and lit it on fire. And as the giants would come out, they would kill them. And many of the giants, according to legend, some of them were burned alive or just died within the cave. So fast forward to basically modernity, and the cave was excavated, and I've actually got the book from 1920, and they talk about, the rumors of 7-footers or taller, and of course all this has been managed, and so we really don't know. And now it gets into M.K. Davis, who's an explorer, is out there at the Lovelock Cave, and I've been there. When you walk in, all there is a deck, a wooden deck. There are no lights, no electricity, there's no guide, there's no docent, there's nothing. It's, you kind of go in and help yourself and look around. It's just a cavern. That's really all it is, because the actual caves have been sealed off by the BLM. So Davis is like taking a flashlight, and he's looking, going all around. He jumps off the deck, which has a railing, and now he's like and he's looking all around the cave to see if there's any artifacts, if anything maybe someone has missed. And sure enough, way back in the recesses of the cave, in a very dark area, he discovers what can only be told as a very large handprint that's on the rock. And he has a large Bowie knife like this, and he places, I mean, that handprint is like 3 times the size of my handprint.
Wow.
And it's on the rock. So fast forward now, about a month after that, I get wind of the story. I go there with Joe Taylor and Ron Moorhead, 2 colleagues of mine, great guys, and my wife, Peggy. And we go back to the cave. We're all excited about it. We've got cameras. We're going to really document this thing and talk about it. And we get up to the area where the handprint is. It's not there.
And you have photographic evidence.
We have photographic evidence of what was there. But we got to the same place. It had been either chipped off, washed off, acid washed off. We don't know. And the reason for this is M.K. Davis put it up on social media, and it created a bit of a sensation. Someone saw this and deliberately went back to the cave and redacted, chipped it off, washed it off with acid. However, whatever means they used, they eliminated the handprint. It's no longer there. And that, to me, what are they afraid of? Again, it's a managed agenda. And that points, that black hand that's on that wall points to the veracity of the Native Americans, specifically the Paiutes, their oral tradition. Gary, there's a history that has been covered up on this planet, and it continues to do so.
It's not just the Paiutes. Virtually every Indian tribe has its
same story.
Recounting of giant stories, of various kinds. Usually the giants are cannibalistic. They war on the tribes, and then finally the tribes have to war back. But the same story is told all over the world. And this is an amazing thing to me, because that is covered up. There is a group of people who don't want those stories to be publicized, even though our own Bible talks about giants, not just once, but dozens of times. Sure. Our Bible talks about it all the way through the Bible, including when you get to the end of the book, you have strange semi-human creatures warring against humanity all over again. Mm-hmm. So this is an ongoing theme in the Bible. But secular history has its own theme, that is, evolution of man from a small ape-like creature up to its present hominid state, 6-foot-tall human being, and I guess the goal there is to prove that nature has produced a superior being, not God. Nature has produced a superior being, and anyone who in any way interferes with that narrative gets pushed aside. And I think the giant story, and I'd like to take it another step now, because also in this book, Nephilim Hybrids, you have the ongoing saga of DNA found in ancient skulls that is not entirely human. In other words, these giants seem to be human hybrids of some sort.
What's interesting, and just to sort of cut to the chase with the DNA evidence, and we had hair samples from 4 skulls from Paracas, Peru, which was sort of red hair. And one of the most astounding things we were able to do, there was this, what we call the baby skull.
The little DNA skull, or skull sample that was used for skull samples, right?
Yes. And the hair, when we unwrapped this baby skull, it's in Watchers 8. And who gets to do this? The skull itself was about 1,935 years old. So it's almost 2,000 years old. And we got to unwrap it. Senior Juan Navarro, the former curator of the museum, he passed away this year, unfortunately.
Senior Juan Navarro, tell us about what he did.
Senior Juan Navarro was the man. He was sort of an amateur archaeologist who really put the Paracas skulls on the map. He dedicated his entire life to trying to find out the origin of these mysterious, enigmatic skulls, and they really are. I mean, when you know, it's one thing to look at a picture, but when you're actually there and you're holding on to these things, and we begin to pore over them and look at them and weigh them, and seeing that the cranial capacity is 25 to 30% greater than a human skull. This is all because of Senior Juan's research. And then later on, Brian Forrester went down and created these YouTube videos, and that's how I became in contact with these guys. And I emailed Brian. Next thing you know, we brought the team down and started examining these things, which, by the way, is ongoing, and we're hopefully getting ready to go towards the tail end of 2016 to get more DNA evidence from the skulls.
You are doing something that needs to be done, and I pray
I
pray the Lord will bless your work.
Thank you.
Because the biblical narrative needs to be supported.
Amen.
Against the evolutionary narrative, by the way. So keep
Thank you,
well.
Gary.
May the Lord bless you and yours. And we'll talk to you next time. I'm sure you'll have something brand new for us if I know L.A. Marzulli, right?
You got it.
All right.
We'll do our best.
Always great talking with L.A. Marzulli. I'm Gary Stearman. You keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.